It's a beautiful Monday afternoon. We are here once more to go through what is happening in Africa on the program Africa Discourse, and I'm your host, Wilson Marshall. Today we'll be taking a look at what is really happening in this great continent, talking about tackling or curbing security challenges and insurgencies. Now let's do a kind of a preview, so to speak, of what is happening in some countries in Africa. Go to Libya. Yes, you know the story as well as I do. We have factions right now of warlords claiming territory, saying they are the ones that really own this territory after the removal of one man, Gaddafi. Now come to South Africa, you get to hear about xenophobic attacks threatening lives and properties of hundreds of persons in that country. What about Central African Republic? France had to send troops to quell insurgency. Now, living there, go to South Sudan, North Sudan, they have their own fair share. What about our own country, Nigeria? Yes, the stories are just crystal clear. Boko Haram, herdsmen farmers clash. Thank God that they've been able to quell the turbulence in the Niger Delta region. What about Egypt? Al-Sisi, he won. You know, the landslide victory, over 90%, but Egypt is being plagued also by pockets of insurgents or militants here and there. The story goes on and on. What about Ethiopia? What about Kenya? What about Somalia? What about Mali, the Tuareg rebels? It's like they've already pitched tent in Africa. What should Africans really do right now to chase these nefarious humans, so to speak, away from this continent for peace to reign? With me here in the studio, I have analysts that are going to throw more light on this discourse. I'd like to start my introduction from my immediate left. He's a clergyman, a political analyst, international local affairs. He's well-grounded, a public affairs commentator. Please join me. Welcome, Reverend Humphrey Arega. Welcome to the show, sir.
My pleasure.
I appreciate your coming.
Thank you.
And he was the first person to be here. Can you imagine that? Always punctual. And of course, oh, Barrister, you're already laughing. You know where I'm going to.
Where are you going to? I'm on time, and that's the most important thing.
Okay. Yeah. You've seen him already. He is a legal practitioner, an environmentalist, a human rights activist. Talk about social activism. He is there. International politics, local politics. He's well grounded in it, and when he starts giving analysis of issues, you really say, yes, this man is really up to date in what he's talking about. Join me, welcome, Barrister Chima Williams. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, Wilson. Thank you, our audience.
All right, we're still expecting the #1 youth in Africa. I'm talking about no other person than Carl Oshodi. Traveling around the continent of Africa is going to bring us details of security report in various countries he has been to. He is going to blow your mind when he starts unraveling so many things that we may sometimes overlook or underlook because we don't have the privilege to be there. But he's been there. He has seen things firsthand. So when it comes, you're going to hear from him. Reverend, let me start off from you. Africa been plagued by insurgency, militia group, having so many colorations, and right now here we are still battling to put Africa in its right place. We talk about investment, economic growth, political progress, but it's like we've been plagued by this canker worm. What's your take on it?
Well, it's a malaise that we really don't know how to maneuver our ways through. But I keep looking back to the African continent and look at the growth progress, for the fact that most of the African countries were ruled and managed by warriors. There are various domains, and warriors are known to be hungry for conquest of territories so as to exert powers and authority to exert tribute for the functionality of their own government. Then you have the intervention of the Western world, Portugal, Europe, that's balkanizing Africa and trying to partition them together in a manner to suit their purpose, but for the discouragement of the African continent. Because a peaceful African continent will not be enslaved or stripped of its mineral resources by Western world. So you need to have to pitch them together as a matter of war, just like what you have in slave trade, where you have to use the locals to capture and sell the slaves. And the locals who are powerful went to other communities to capture able-bodied men and sell them as slaves for their own benefit. So we still have these problems plaguing us. And then you are talking about democracy being added to it. Democracy is not a part of the African culture. We are used to governance by kings and rulers who dominate over the affairs of humans and see them as slaves, use one community against another to be able to establish their throne. So we have this plague, and the modern lords, who are the political gladiators, have only just copied what they learned from their forefathers, not taking into cognizance the modernity of life. We're talking about democracy that ought to have a lot of things in commonalities, but that is rooted on the fact that insecurity, insurgency, and turbulence is fueled by injustice. Injustice, and then you have the imposition of life one with another. So we have a lot of problems that have given, and then you have a vast area of land in the African continent, the Horn of Africa, in the desert that is uninhabited, that is fertile for people who are able to organize themselves together to launch attacks. And because of the fact that some of the environments are not habitable, it's difficult. There's Sambisa forest in Nigeria. You never knew, I never knew of Sambisa forest in Nigeria until Boko Haram came. And they are telling you it's as big as, bigger than some countries. And the terrain is something that even the Nigerian army has still not been able to finally address or be able to maneuver the thing. And that's why you have this person. So a lot of things are happening. And I'm sure as the discussion unfolds, we'll begin to look at what and how one can look at the things and bring out the justice out of it.
All right, you've heard Reverend. He gave a very solid background for this discourse. Now, Barrister Chima Williams, I want to take it from where he stopped. He talked about we get to experience these things because there is injustice. And we talked about Africa also operating that warlord-like kind of leadership that encourages invasion of persons just to acquire more things. Can you thread it from there?
Yeah. Thank you, Wilson. I think Reverend laid a very solid background to this discourse, tracing it back to the origins, the beginnings. And I think part of the greatest reason for insurgency, conflicts, crises, in Africa, for me, historically, can be traced to this link, between our current existence and our past. In Africa today, we copy everything that comes from, the West or the North. Okay? We are not looking at our own indigenous ways of life, what worked for African countries when we were, in our local settings, that we were controlled by our people, ourselves. Even though we had warlords, if you juxtapose the African of today and African of the origin that, Reverend talked about, you will know that Africa before was more prosperous than it is today. Okay? And that the linkage between the past and the present creates the conflict. Now, the second one is the fact that, we have not, as a result of mostly our colonial backgrounding, those that colonized us, they balkanized Africa, made us to see ourselves as different. You know, that is why you will have Francophone Africans, you will have Anglophone Africans, you know, people that used to be one, that used to, you know, cross each other, you know, in terms of trade, in terms of business, in terms of farming activities. You know, that is why you had in history the ancient Dahomey, you know, the Gold Coast. Nobody was talking of Ghana, nobody was talking of Nigeria, but, you know, these establishments that were popular. So traders could move freely and easily from Nigeria to now Ghana and do their business and come back. But now it is no longer that easy, okay, because of the colonial structures that have been put in place. The third is, you know, our own political undoing. Because if we trace how did most African countries, you know, attain political independence, many just discussed. Therefore, they do not understand what it means to weld a nation together and speak as one. Because suffering has a way of making people, if they have good leadership, to be creative. Okay? If we go back, most of the inventions that we talk of, you know, in terms of perhaps military hardware in Nigeria, were developed during the Nigerian Biafra Civil War. So we must talk about the positives of what happened so that, you know, can we try to now go back and look at those inventions that were made then,
all right,
to recreate them. Okay. Now, the last point I want to make before my brother takes over,
okay,
you know, is the saying that fear, okay, is the root to the rich man's pocket. So all these crises, all these conflicts, what are the genesis? In most African countries, they are political.
They are political.
They have political origin.
Okay.
Who controls what, when, and how? Okay,
political origin, who controls what, when, and how. Anyway, I've introduced him already in absentia. Right now, he's here with us, the #1 youth in Africa, president of the youth in Africa. He's one of our own political analysts, a dogged fighter when it comes to activism, international and local politics. Is well granted. General, welcome, Carl Oshudi, PhD, right?
Yes.
As doctor. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
All right, you've heard them. They've given a very brilliant foundation for this discourse. So what's your angle? I believe you're traveling far and wide around this African continent, even outside Africa. So what's your take on this?
My take on it, before I came in, I was listening to Reverend. His analysis are fantastic, wonderful. And also my brother. I've been to 46 countries in Africa, and I've been to over 12,000 communities within the space of a year, 7 months. And there are problems, there are challenges. Let's not say problem now, there are challenges. It looks familiar. And like my brother said, some part has political undertone. But some of them are unresolved socio-ethnic, socio-cultural, and socio-political crises they've had over time. That people who felt marginalized, people who felt excluded, people who were not in tandem with the policies that has to do with the peculiarity of their people, often come out and raise up their voices to be amplified. Although before this amplification, they had, exhausted all manners of dialogue, all manners of trying to attract the government or attract critical stakeholders to listen to them. But by and large, most of these cries, most of these agitations are not listened to. It just for instance, let's use Nigeria as a case study, as a model. Nigeria has over 500, ethnic nationalities and over 350 tribes, whatever, it will be. But you and I know that we have a composition of, alleged majority and alleged minority. Now, this minority and majority actually creates, symmetrics of division. And this division do not, rather than drawing the people closer, are separating the people. Now, look at the advanced country like US, where we have, the Indians who are even aborigines and indigenous people. They are also somehow, somewhere excluded. Those are the people that are supposed to constitute the majority. Those are the people that are supposed to constitute, the ideal Americans. But today, we have a people that are guided by innovations. We have a people that are guided by, technology. We have the Spanish, we have the British, we have the Irish. All of these composition of ethnic nationalities have gathered in America. Now, during the Wild Wild West, or before, the independence, that is prior to 1776, now, America had their own, undoing. They had their own challenges. But because the people were serious, first in developing their community, second in cohesion, third in trying to ensure that, the economic benevolence of the society is spread amongst, the society, members of the society, that is citizens now, that when they got their independence in 1776, they had issue of what gets what, who gets what are these persons, what do you bring on the table, what kind of ideas and content do you have on the table that can say, okay, you are getting, say the allocation, you are getting 6% rather than 2%. What makes you get 6% will also need to be addressed. That America at that time, United States in quote, before they had 27 states. Now, they had to bring in all other states, like New Mexico, Chicago, and all this. That is the period of Wild Wild West, where America's situation, even Nigeria's situation right now as it is now, some African situation right now as it is now, was even the tip of the iceberg of what happened in the Wild Wild West. So we have, we have challenges in Africa, yes, but somehow, somewhere, we need to, as a people, as a continent, come together. That's why, or allegedly, that is why the composition of the African Organization of African Unity was emerged in 1963 and now converted or turned into African Union in 2003. Now, all of this was supposed to address the peculiarity, was supposed to address the ethnic diversity, the economic diversity, irrespective of the colonial chain or the balkanization of the African continent as it is now. The leaders are supposed to sit down innovatively, see how first to talk on the economic basis of the sustenance of the African people. First, build on manpower, because what we are now focused on is that our people focus on infrastructural development. Now, you cannot have infrastructural development without having development of the people. Now, we now have, they said they are practicing democracy, right? Now, the democracy we have now does not really affect the people on the grassroots. We have an elitist democracy, whereby we now have bottom approach rather than bottom-up approach.
Okay, I'll come back to you. Now, three of you have spoken well, given a very strong, well, I'll say concrete foundation for this discourse, but they raised the point saying that fundamentally speaking, when we talk about security challenges or insurgency, it has a lot of political coloration than any other coloration. What's your angle on that?
Yes, it is obvious that the African continent is plagued with political instability, and that's again because most of the political leadership is ruled by fear, ignorance, and two, insufficient understanding of what ought to be. We still have a lot of ethnocentric individuals who believe that it is only they, within the circle of their ethno origin, that should have the authority and power over everything. And then you find people who feel marginalized, say, look, if we are part of this country, then we must be a part of the things that happen, and we must be a part of those who make decisions, And so the politicians use a lot of foot soldiers to achieve their political aim. And most of these foot soldiers are armed with arms and ammunition. after political gain, those arms and ammunition are not recovered. Those who have the arms and ammunition are using them now as their own weapon with which to gain their own authority and power and means to an end. Then you also have the issue of, like I said, international interventions through West balkanization, because the West is sustained by the mineral resources of the African continent. The African continent is loaded with a lot of mineral resources blessed by God. But then they must be extracted. And since to a large extent we don't have what you might call the ability to extract, those who need those raw materials use a lot of economic powers with guns. And that becomes the problem. Especially we also hear people saying that if you manufacture a gun, you must test it. And in most cases, they want to test their guns in Africa. Unfortunately, you don't have the understanding that people should need to have, that human beings have values that need to be preserved. So we are looking at a whole lot of political instability with economic emancipation. Because there is a population explosion. You know, the African population is exploding at a rate that is much, much larger than even the Western countries. And they are contending with a lot of forces. Now you are contending with land, you are contending with water, you are contending with anything. And because the land is not increased as the population increases, people are squeezing in, and there is a struggle of who gets what. And it is those who are power that gains a lot from what is happening. So, and because our politicians are not understanding the responsibility placed on them to help make sure that there is a good management of resources, and there is a good bringing together of the various components to be able to make a whole unit, that's where you have the problem. You have a lot of greed, corruption, and once you say an angry man, a hungry man is an angry man. And once you have people who are angry, they look for means and ways to get those who cause them anger. You know, you see every rich man, those who have stolen our resources, as those who are enemy to progress. And some of those who cannot stomach the issue of discussion take to different means, and then you have a lot of crises on our hands. So I believe that if we are able to look at the political indices and be able to manage our political affairs, then it's possible for us to manage the economic affairs, and then it's able to manage the things. And another thing that has happened is because the educational aspect of life is being underlooked by the political elite of Africa. Once, you see, if you give a madman a cutlass, you have always asked him to clear the road without giving him instructions, and anything goes. And that's what's happening. Most of those who are involved in insurgency, who have created insecurity, do not have understanding, basically, of what some of the things they do. They just get instructions without understanding what the instructions are. And they carry out instructions on behalf of those who you may never see.
All right.
But I believe that if we are able to do that, and the Western countries also should, as a matter of fact, withdraw their kind of political undoing of Africa from us. Because you find that in almost every African state, there is a hand of the West in destabilizing the African states.
A hand of the West in destabilizing the African state. I'll come back to you on that. Now, he talked about structures, up, middle, down, down, middle, up. People like saying that some leaders are gaining from this. It could be from the West, it could be from the locality of the African continent, even could be from the far, far East. That the one feeling is because when there is conflict, there is gain. Do you see this as part of what is this contentious situation in Africa because of the gain of the supposed leaders or masters?
Well, you see, if I flow along with Reverend Arada, you know, we must look at what are the causes. They are both internal, you know, indigenous causes, and then they are the external causes, which arises from influence, trade, economy, political, manipulations and maneuverings and, all of that. Let me talk about the internal first. Internally, when you don't have a sound economic plan, definitely you will not have a sound political arrangement. These two goes hand in hand. And why will we be talking about the West? It's because they have solid economic arrangements that give them the audacity and the power to influence our own political structures and political leaders. Okay, so which means the challenge that African nations have had from independence is how to convert the God-given natural resources and natural endowments. Because if you look at it, for me, Africa is the richest continent. Because if you check how many types of resources do you have? 2 critical resources. The human resources and the natural resources. These are the 2 critical resources that can create and uncreate a nation or an empire. Now, Africa, population-wise, we are not doing badly. Africa has the largest population, perhaps second to Asia. Okay? And in terms of natural resources, I do not think that there's any continent of the world that is as richly endowed as Africa. Okay? It's contestable if there's any. So, but because of lack of planning, because of lack of thinking leaders, because this is where the challenge is, it takes one man to galvanize an entire society and push them to the right direction or wrong direction. The development that occurred in Europe and America did not come by the multitude of the citizens. One person drove it. Okay? So now Africa has had the misfortune of having and sustaining such thinking leaders like the Kwame Nkrumahs of, this world. Okay? Those leaders that had the capacity to think, that has the capacity, to present a debatable issue on how to transform their society. And you find out that the crisis we have is because, most of our so-called political leaders cannot withstand the challenges of critical debates, critical discourse. And what do? Like Reverend had already mentioned, they go out, instead of selling their policies and programs, during a political contest to the electorate, for the electorate to weigh, they resort to arming, gullible and hungry people. To now act for them to get political power by force. And when you get it by force, there is no way you can take any part of your constituents as your responsibility.
All right.
Now that is internal. Okay? Which means for us to get out of the woods, African leaders at whatever level must begin to show the ability to think creatively.
Think creatively.
Okay? Now we go out to the external. Where this is where the issue of, technology comes in. The developed countries that we talk about are developed because they are developed technologically.
All right.
And their technological inventions must have a market. Okay? And if that market must be sustained, they must make sure that the market is skewed in such a way that the end user countries will not have the capacity to develop their own. Okay. Because if African nations begin to develop their own military wares, definitely internally, definitely they will not go to Europe or America to buy.
Right. Okay, all right. I'll come back to you. Just hold on. I'll come back to you. Now, he gave a little bit of an inclination to the external factor. I already talked about there is always the hand of the West, so to speak, or developed countries that are, like, causing this trouble, so to speak, in Africa. Now, in your days of travel, journey around Africa, I talked about 46 countries, right, in Africa. Did you perceive the hands of an external master causing this kind of commotion in this country you've paid visit to?
Well, let us assume that we all know the challenges facing Africa. Let us assume that each one of us are trying to solve this problem on a daily basis. Let us assume that some of those leaders who I would typify as giving them, that is giving the function of a medical doctor to a babalawo.
But there are doctors in their own respect.
Now, that's I'm trying to typify an instance here.
All right.
Let us assume, we're just creating an assumption now.
Yeah.
Let us assume that Africa's problem can be resolved, like a flicker. The idea of the West having to have a hand in the process of the present predicament of Africa, to political pundits, it will seem as if you are chasing shadows. The level at which, if there is any at all, these superpower nations influence Africa is on a minimal level, because it is not this West that tells you to abandon education of your people. It is not the West or Asia that told you or that influences them to abandon capacity building of your people. It is not the West or Asia that has influenced Africans and African leaders from thinking deep. Let us also take away the West. Now you can look at, in terms of population, Asia is measuring over 4 billion now. Just China alone. Africa itself is measuring 1.3 billion people. The youth constitute 860 million people. Now, you can see this workforce, this demography, is a demographic with work without work. Demography that are willing to change the narrative in Africa, that are willing to use innovation to power and drive change in Africa. Now, what the leaders, serious leaders, are supposed to be doing right now from the African context, I'm not interested in whether Asia or Europe they are influencing Africa or not. We should talk about ourselves. What are those innovative solutions that we have now that can salvage this issue? Because when you refuse to build the capacities of young people, you will influence them to engage in social vices. You will influence them to be agitated, and this agitation creates violent extremism. It is out of these violent extremisms you now have, contentions of explosion of insurgency today in Africa, terrorism today in Africa. Sometimes people said terrorism is imported into Africa. No, it is not imported into Africa. Every nation, every continent have its own strands and definition of terrorism and insurgency. Because terrorism and insurgency grew out from a long years of marginalization, long years of political exclusion, long years of trying to subjugate a supposed minority ethnic nationality. That they will now rise up to say, okay, no, we can't do this, we can't take this anymore. Now my two gentlemen have actually talked on this complex of issues. Now you see, some of these analyses that these nations have are often textbook analysis. When you go to the field, when you go to these places, go to Congo, for instance, DRC Congo, go and look at what is happening there. There is extreme poverty in Congo. In the midst of amounts of mineral resources, The mineral resources or the mineral deposit in Congo, Nigeria and the rest 50 countries combined are not up to just 1/10 of what is in Congo. You cannot imagine, and even in the presence of these resources, people are dying of starvation. People are excluded. Children are now being converted to soldiers. Women are being raped on a daily basis. People are being excluded from the process of development. So what now happens? The solution right now is, how do Africans, if the leaders, the so-called leaders, have failed in the process, in their wholesome responsibility to think, to dictate, and see how they can use the thinking to change the narrative of their society, of their community, and their country. It is now left for me and you, all of us here, to, in our own various respective organization and community setting, begin to raise up and amplify voices from that angle. For me, I am doing my own. I had over 860 young people. And what we are doing is that we are creating innovative solutions, powered by science and technology, to see how we can begin to develop the capacities of young people, who tomorrow will now become the leaders, who tomorrow will now hold the wheels of development, and see how they can use Western civilization, or perhaps the modern civilization, to power their various development structures. For instance, like business enterprise. You and I know that SMEs actually oil the economy of any nation, right? In US, for instance, now, it is SMEs. You don't need giant companies to employ or to take in amount of population. What you just need is to empower my brother, empower Reverend, empower yourself, and see that Reverend will employ 8 persons. You will employ 8 persons. We just need 1,000, for instance, in Nigeria, who can go in the workforce. And this workforce, what now happen? The workforce can now begin to accelerate development and change people. Now, when you empower somebody, that person have 2 or 3 stomachs to feed. When you empower him, he or she does not know or will not begin to think of violent extremism with him. They will not be frustrated. They can feed, they can relate, and they can affect and impact people positively. That way, violence, extremism will be reduced minimally.
All right, thank you so much, Cal. Well, we are taking a look at tackling security challenges and insurgencies in Africa. Talking about terrorist group having affiliates from Africa with other terrorist group outside Africa. Do you think that is really pumping, so to speak, life into the activities of insurgency in Africa? Reverend.
Of course, there's no doubt about that. The world is becoming a global village, and every rising individual wants to have his tentacles established far and wide, so that they can have. Is either you are looking for human capital in one location, you are looking for financial capital in another location, you are looking for political influence in another location, because all of this goes together. You see, you cannot have insecurity if you don't have if you don't have a good and understanding political environment. You see, it is politics mixed with money that creates insurgency and insecurity.
Politics mixed with money.
Every politician is insecure in his political activity. He needs the resources, but he needs people to guide him and help him make sure that what he has as power and resources is kept. And there is a multiplication, because if a man guides your property for a long time and he doesn't see himself benefiting from it, he looks for ways to benefit. And that's why you find that there is attacks and insurgencies here and there. It's influenced. Again, it's also influenced by governments across the country, across the world. We keep saying that because each government wants to stay in power. And they arm and do and create some persons and communities around themselves who they use as agents of destabilization to others. You look at Latin America today, it's in turmoil. You see, Europe is becoming another thing. It's either you are an establishment person or you are a populist person. These are issues. They create something. And unfortunately in Africa, we don't discuss. We don't even have ideological basis on which turmoil happens. We're talking of power, we're talking of resources, money, control. Just like my brother was saying, you see, what happens in Africa now is because the resources in Africa is what will fuel the rest part of the world. And there is a scramble. Today there's a scramble between the Asian tiger, which is China, dominated by China, and Europe or America on the other side. And these persons try to use individuals to prevent the other person from gaining assets. If you look at the mining sector, for instance, in African countries, you find that most of those who are mining are not indigenous of the African continent, even in our oil industry. They are all external persons. They arm and hire individuals to guide their facilities and some other things. And this at times angers the community, who are not experiencing any development from the resources you are exploiting. And that becomes a situation that blows into some very heavy fighting. I find a lot of things. So insurgency, and like I said from the beginning, is fueled by injustice and lack of economic capacity. Not because these things cannot be solved. It's just that the political elite have refused to allow what ought to be to be. You think we talk about Europe today and America, to a large extent there's a level of stability because there is justice, because there is equity distribution. Like he said just what I was saying, you don't develop a nation by multinationals. No, it's by helping the individuals in the small environment. But that cannot happen if there is no proper education. Education is not just going to the university to have a certificate. You have these hand-developed mechanisms which people have. You have your intellect, you have your, they call it the native intelligence in some areas. If you're able to develop that, you don't need to build a skyscraper to have a company. You can have a company in a room, but you are developing something. But you are being encouraged. Today, how many SMEs can go to the bank easily and get loan to manage their business? Because the high cost of borrowing is not encouraging. You know, but you go to developed countries, they have a deliberate system of encouraging the small groups to develop. Even the big companies, they are told that certain percentage of their resources should be used to develop their community and make them useful. But today, what do you have in Africa? Even if there is such a law, the political elite will not even allow it to happen. And then you have ignorant, I use the word with all due respect, youth in the community who believe that all they need to do is to drive big cars, create trouble with some guns, and they don't even know what's education. Education is something that enables you to reason and to give clarity to what they are talking about. You appeal to people about what you are doing, not by force. But today, in Africa, you use force and subjugation and fear, and create fear in the mind of others to subject them to whatever they want to do.
All right, force, fear, subjugation. Now, he raised a very vital point. He said political leaders don't want it to stop. Barrister Chima, will you take it from there?
Well, you see, nobody gives up comfort easily to another person. And this we must realize. Okay? And it is said that power is never gotten on a platter. So you struggle for it. Okay? Let me share this little story that I had in a bus long time ago. That you go to a politician, you know, and you are asking for support, for help. And the man looks at you and ignores you. You'll be complaining. That you should go and check what that politician did to be holding that office that person is holding. Maybe he has sacrificed a relation. Maybe he has sacrificed part of his body. You have your own, you're enjoying all the comfort of everything, you know, working for you, and then you want support from him. So this is it. So until we get to that level, because this is where we must make comparative analysis. Okay? Yes, how come that most of these crises that we talk, you know, do not exist at the level that they operate, you know, in third world countries as in the developed countries? Okay? Where we still probably have political leaders. Because there are certain things that are already established as a norm, as a tradition, as a culture that have been institutionalized. Okay? So, In such countries, you know, there are standards that you cannot fall short of. You will be asked by the populace. But here, our political leaders, in fact, as they are misbehaving, because they are little pets that gaze to ignorant people, not only that they are not educated, because there are a lot of people that are graduates that are illiterate.
Yes.
No, they are graduates.
They are graduates.
And they are
from
illiterates.
universities, but they are illiterates. Okay? Because if you are a graduate, as 2019 is coming, you are a graduate, even though you don't have white-collar job, you cannot use the knowledge that you acquired in your 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 years in the university to begin something that will make you have personal dignity.
All right. All right.
That you will now go to be used to create confusion.
Okay.
You are an illiterate.
All right. I'll come back to you, Joseph, because right now I have to manage this time because our time is almost up. It's almost up now. They are speaking along the same line, talking about the political leaders. People like say that sometimes most of these problems are in the hands of our political leaders, especially those in authority. Carl.
Well, you know, the prices of tomatoes, rice and garri in the markets are determined by policymakers. And the head of these policymakers are politicians. They are the ones that direct the affairs of governance. They also have supporters, those who aid them. They are called civil servants. You see, in a deliberate and conscious attempt to alienate the people, they have created a disparity, that is a bridge, a sea of disparity. In Africa, you see, based on statistics, Africa has 287 million graduates, not undergraduates, graduates, who rather than creating jobs are seeking for jobs. You see, I want to also give you a shocker. The greatest resources that Asia, America, and Europe are taking away from Africa is not the natural resources. They are the human potential resources who are going there for greener pasture. Some who are being killed or, you know, who go on suicide mission to the Mediterranean Sea and they die there. The rest who escape from this, who survive, goes into that place with their exponential potentials, deposits the best of their self from all they have learned into those nations' economy. When they make money or when they make resources, economy, from that economy, they also leave it there. Only a figment, only a paltry sum of the fact that, let us compare Nigeria in 2015, 2016, they said over 20 billion US dollars was, you know, repatriated back to the country. You can compare with just 10%. You see, that money that was repatriated was just 10%.
All right. All right. All right. Carl, our time is up, but Reverend, briefly, you're going to be the one to have the last say on this discussion. Way forward, briefly.
The way forward?
Yes.
The way forward is a mental change for the individual, because it's out of the abundance of the heart that the mouth speaks. The politicians need to have a rebel. And then the people also need to stop celebrating mediocrity, celebrating immorality.
Yeah.
Then to be celebrating what? Or to be celebrated those who are making it. There are people who are struggling and making it, and yet nobody recognizes them. So we need to have a change of orientation. If we are
change of orientation. Thank you so much, gentlemen. You can get the signal. You can even hear the signal. But Wilson, collect your wrap. It's over. Time's up. Time's up. Not to worry. Discussion that says a continuum. Government that says a continuum. Keep looking at Africa as a continent. I keep bringing to you reports from me, Wilson and Masha. It's bye for now.